Glad to have this chance to get to know the people of Pennsylvania a bit better than I am already aware of them. The thought that I had for this morning was to converse with you a bit about myself, introduce myself, obviously Colonel George Washington, to you, speak with you about why on earth I'm in Pennsylvania, number one. Number two, who I am, where I'm coming from, and why a Virginian has come all the way north here to defend you and your homes in this conflict against the French. For you all to know and understand, the year is 1758 for me, and for all of us, November 1758. Just make sure we're all on the same page. Do you mind if I sit occasionally? Is that all right with you?
That's all right.
All three of you? Good?
Yeah.
Very good. As you know, I am from Virginia. I initially was not born into a life that I would have expected military service necessarily. My life has been a complicated one. At a very young age, probably around yours. Let me guess. You're now a bit younger than you. You're probably what, 13, 14?
11.
11. Oh, exactly your age. Well, see, look at that. Perfection. 11 years old. When I was 11 years old, my father died. And because of his death, I found myself in a particularly unique situation. You must understand that in Virginia society, which has at least some similarities with Pennsylvania society, I'm sure, but in Virginia gentry society, those of us who are born to a certain level of privilege and expectation, there is a pressure and a position of service that comes along with our birth, that because of who we are born to be, therefore we must do our best to elevate ourselves in society. And so because of myself being the 11-year-old of the family when my father died, I found a unique perspective because I was the eldest of my mother's children, but not the eldest of my father's children. Do you understand the distinction between the two? Mm-hmm. So my father had two elder sons who survived, Lawrence and Austin. And when he died, because of the way our laws work, they received the greater portion of the land and people to work that land as part of their inheritance. Whereas myself and my four younger siblings, are you all siblings? Yeah, is she a good sister? My sister would say the exact same thing about me. But when my father died, my mother then found herself without a husband, us without a father, and effectively myself and my four siblings, all under the age of 11, myself the eldest, were effectively orphaned by law. The mother still lived, but by law, legally underneath it, we are orphans. And so because of that loss at an early age of my father, some pathway forward into life and society was necessary, a different path. Because my father would not be there to walk alongside me in every aspect of it. He would not be there to stand with me side by side. And the word we use is patron, which is a complicated term, but basically someone to teach you the ways of your society, to help elevate you in position, to give you means and access to those of importance, etc., etc., etc. And that loss must be filled by some other person or persons. Lawrence and Austin received the land. Me and the four others received very little. And to add complexity to this, my mother chose not to remarry, which is very unusual in my society. Very, very unusual for a lady of quality, of privilege, to choose not to remarry. And so she raised myself and four younger versions of effectively me by herself, which, believe you me, is no small task. All of us are very strong-willed, all of us are very tenacious, all of us have a mind about us, and then Samuel's the eldest as much as possible. But that circumstance then found that the opportunity for being a landed gentleman, of owning property, of owning people to work the land, and thereby elevating yourself in society, effectively was altered. The path must be a different one. And so, my family and I began to debate what exactly would this path look like? What method would I follow to find position? And position is everything. Because as the eldest of my mother's children, are you the eldest of your family? No. So you have an older sibling. Now, as the eldest sibling, do they bear the weight of much responsibility in the family? Do they have more things they have to do? Mm-hmm. Same thing with me. So because of this expectation, because I was the eldest of my mother's children, I was expected to be the leader of that household. You're how old, son? 15. So imagine at the age of 11, being expected to be effectively the face of your family. It's a lot of responsibility. Would you like it at the age of 15? I did not wish it at the age of 11. But responsibility and duty dictated that I must take that position. how to do this, how to bring honor to the family, how to bring recognition, how to elevate myself so that I may elevate them. Measuring land for people. Really exciting, isn't it? Well, for a 17-year-old, very exciting. I began as surveyor. Surveyors are people who measure property. And I was out in the Ohio Valley, well, not the Ohio, sorry, the Shenandoah Valley. I jumped ahead of myself. Out in the Shenandoah Valley, measuring land for the Fairfaxes, people who came alongside me, became patrons, assisted me in positioning myself and understanding the importance of genteel society, how to engage with people of wealth and affluence, how to have connections. Through them, I met the governor of Virginia. Through them and my brother Lawrence, I met other important families. And I began measuring land, and I brought a certain amount of money and a certain amount of property I was able to purchase to begin becoming a landed gentleman, like my brothers were. Begin the process. Begin. Around 1,500 acres. A little place called Bullskin Plantation near Winchester, Virginia. And then conveniently, in the midst of all of this, a war broke out. Before that, the thought then was to become a soldier. Because by being a soldier, especially if one could obtain military commission in the King's Army, you're guaranteed as an officer pay for life. And if your regiment is disbanded for any reason, you're guaranteed half pay for life, which means you are at least financially stable. So the hope was that surveying could lead to a military position one day, perhaps, and I would be able to serve His Majesty the King permanently until my dying breath and bring honor to the family, etc., etc. And into this world, the war against the French began. Now, I was involved in it at its very, very beginning. So now comes to my part in the war. You all have heard of Fort Necessity, perhaps? It's in the Ohio Valley in Virginia. Pennsylvanians claim it. We're right. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But I was sent as a messenger to the French back in 1753 to take messages to the French who were at that time trying to control the Ohio Valley. You know where the Ohio Valley is? Do you know where that is? It's west, directly west of here. Ish. West, northwest. Ish. And the thought was that if France claimed the Ohio and England claimed the Ohio, that one of the two of us was right. And we all knew the English was correct. So the thought was that we would go there, tell the French to leave, and in so doing, reaffirm our alliances with the various Indian nations living in and around the Ohio Valley, most notably the Iroquois Confederacy, a great conglomerate of nations of Indian peoples who had sway and control of the Ohio and the various smaller nations living in that place, the Shawnee, the Delaware, the Mingo. So I was sent with messages from the governor, an important position, an elevation, right? To have this military authority now being invested in me, a young, very experienced 21-year-old. I thought, to travel to the Ohio, to give the French message to leave, an ambassador's position, an official capacity to serve as if speaking to the government of Spain or Holland, etc. And while doing so, to give messages to the Seneca, the Mingo, the Delaware, the Shawnee, as if also foreign powers. For you must understand, we treat these Indian nations as if they are foreign powers. They are to be treated with the same dignity and respect that an ambassador, well, not from France, but an ambassador from Spain or Holland or Prussia would respect. No one respects the French. They're French. And that responsibility was one that I carried with great excitement, to tell my family what I had accomplished. And so I went, I delivered my message, nearly froze to death several different times, made several mistakes along the way, one being to overlook a very important Indian leader, a woman named Alakipa. I didn't understand the importance of their society, that women are equally as involved, if not more so involved in political decisions, making of war, and so by neglecting to speak to her, but speaking to other Indian leaders, I had effectively insulted her, and she let me know very soundly that I had done so. I was almost back to the bounds of Virginia when I received a message telling me to come back, for you have overlooked your conversation with me. And so around I did, and went back I did, and was forced to give gifts to make up for my foolish mistake. And unfortunately, I'd given all the best gifts to Scaruade and Tenagrisan, the men that I'd met with previously, and so all I had left was a match coat and a bottle of rum. And the rum, frankly, was the better of the two gifts. The match coat was not very good at all. She overlooked my foolishness, my youth, my mistake. And I think in those days, the idea of leadership began to truly form in my mind a bit more. Again, I mentioned before how in my society, there are those who are born to privilege, like myself. Now, granted, not the highest echelons of my society, but still born to a certain level of privilege. An expectation of service, we mentioned this before, an obligation to lead in our society. And so this concept was bound up in not how I was a leader, but because I was supposed to be one. I was born to that position. And here, in this society that I had found myself in, with the Seneca, the Mingo, the Delaware, etc., I found leadership not being marked by meritocracy, not by birth, but by meritocracy. Elections being held. We hold elections as well, but it's only the gentry who typically are the ones who win the elections, because they're the only ones who can take time away from their home. So this contrast of leadership began to ring in my mind. We move forward to the war. So the next year, 1754, I was sent out to the Ohio Valley with a contingent of men to begin constructing a fort at the forks of the Ohio. Three rivers come together, very important to control. Think of them as highways in the backcountry. The French we got there. The English got there first. I wasn't there. The French came with a larger force. We had 30 men. They had almost 800. Discrepancy there, obviously. The English fort that was being built was burned by the French. The men who were there were threatened. Our Indian ally, the half-king, Tanagreeson, was threatened that if he did not go back to the French alliance, that he and his family would be killed within 30 days. So would their brothers, the English. Very peaceful language from the French. And then I was found some 100 or so miles away, a small contingent of soldiers, less than 150, knowing that the oncoming march of a French army of nearly 800 men was moving towards us. And as they were coming, they were picking up various Indian allies along the way. The Shawnee and Delaware had been our allies. They had abandoned us for the French. Why? Because we had not made good on our promises to protect them and their families, and so they had a choice. Either they stay with the English or abandon us and join with the French. So the army of 800 turned quickly to an army of 1,000. And I still had 150. I did not know what to do, frankly. By that time, I was 22 years old. A lieutenant colonel, named to that position because of my connections to the Fairfaxes as the governor, and because of my experience as a surveyor in the frontier. And I had a choice: stand and fight, or retreat. Neither of them very good options. But before that came, a small skirmish took place about 6 miles from our camp. My first taste of combat. We were engaged trying to protect the half-king and his family from this French party that moved towards us. We ambushed them. We were successful in the ambush. Killed a few, captured many. My first taste of violence. And I will admit, I wrote to my brother a few days later, John, my younger brother. I told him that I'd heard the whistle of the bullets, that there was something pleasing in the sound. We won. That helped a great deal. We were successful in our attempt. But 2 months later, at Fort Necessity, the shoe was very much on the other foot. This elation, this desire for service, for king, for country, for family, these things that had driven me into military service with the hope of recognition for myself, recognition for my family, and honor. And if you died gloriously, so much the better. But all of it for one purpose: to elevate myself in society. The idea of war being used as a way to elevate was changed fundamentally. At Fort Necessity, I had at that time nearly 300 men, some from South Carolina who had come forward to support us. The battle that took place there lasted for nearly 9 hours. Through a driving rainstorm. We were in a small fortification, frankly barely larger than the space that we sit in now. Probably another 30 or so feet on each side. Driving rainstorm, as I said. The enemy all surrounding us in the woods, firing into our position. I will not go into details, for there are children present, obviously. Suffice to say, in that chaos of combat, some 300 men were reduced, 75 wounded, 35 killed. The water and the mud and the blood mixed in together so high that it was almost up to our knees and sometimes our thighs. Fear, panic setting in amongst those who were present. And I saw The next piece of this leadership concept in those moments, I mentioned before, you're born to privilege, you're born to lead. I watched a man of Virginia, a fellow named George Muse, who had served previously against the Spanish in an earlier war. He was a man who was born to privilege, a man born expected to lead. And what happened was, in the initial conflict, he had been sent out with the South Carolinians, a small contingent of both Virginians and Carolinians, to stand against the enemy. The first volley was fired, and then Mr. Muse, then my major, turned tail, abandoned the South Carolinians, ordered his men to retreat, and fled back to the small stockade that we had built where the rest of the men were waiting. Abandoned not only the South Carolinians, but his own troops. A man born to lead. Less than an hour or two later, I saw the other conflict, the other opposite, what true leadership actually is, or at least what I began to understand it to be. South Carolinian named Mercier, a lieutenant. A man not born to any expectation. A man who had served, who had put his time in, who had learned the ways of warfare of his men. And he stood with his Carolinians at the most vulnerable position of our fortification, exposed to the enemy's fire. And when I say stood, I mean stood. Most of the men were cowered down behind. I do not mean cowards in a cowardly sense, but moving and hiding themselves down below the fortification and firing over. He stood fully exposed to the enemy, urging his men to stand and to fight, to stand for the man next to them, for their brother. All thoughts of king and country completely out of their minds. Instead, standing and fighting for the brothers around them, knowing that, as he said, we should sell our lives as dear as possible with bayonet attached to musket, and if necessary, die to the man to hold this position. Until he was wounded. That stopped him. Now, he continued to urge his men to fight until he was wounded the second time. And as he was being carried on a stretcher back to the stockaded fort where Mr. Muse was still hiding, a third musket ball took his life. All the while urging his men to stand and fight, stand and fight. A contrast. A man born to leadership and a man leading by action. You see the discrepancy? That was Fort Necessity. We surrendered our position, unfortunately. We were fortunate to get out alive. The musket balls were not nearly so pleasing. Move forward a year. My second military experience. I was serving with General Braddock in 1755. It would be 3 years ago now. We were once again in the confines of the disputed lands between Pennsylvania and Virginia, once again in the Ohio Valley, trying to take Fort Duquesne from the French, which had been built at the forks of the Ohio. We failed. This time, instead of 300 men, 1,200 men. Well, at the one battle, we had over 2,300. And for context, this conflict at Braddock's defeat, 1,200 men, it was a worse catastrophe than Fort Necessity. We lost about a third of our forces at Fort Necessity. At Braddock's defeat, of the 1,200 men on the field, 450 of them were killed, 550 of them were wounded. Of the 83 officers, 69 of them were killed and wounded. You do the math and put those together, that out of 1,200 men engaged in conflict, 1,000 of them were casualties. 1,000 casualties. There are many reasons for it. Incompetence in leadership, yes. Inability to understand the methods of warfare, yes. The breakdown in discipline of a military force, yes. Without discipline, an army will collapse. And I learned that very important lesson in that process, that this discipline is absolutely necessary to keep an army together. When you lose discipline, you lose control. You lose unit integrity. You lose any sort of concept to keep a force of military might together. Without discipline, you are not an army, you are a rabble. And I watched how the best trained troops that England had, the British Army, reduced and chased as if they were sheep pursued by dogs. Only a third of our casualties, I'm convinced, were not the enemy killing our men, but it was due to friendly fire. Soldiers panicking, firing at any puff of gunpowder that they saw. I saw officers cut down by their own men. One of my officers that I knew, a wagoner who'd been with me at Fort Necessity, his brother went out to a regiment of British troops. The Virginians that were there had moved to the trees when discipline and unit cohesion broke down to fight more in the style that the Indians would fight in. The French call it la petite guerre, the small war, light infantry tactics. And his men were being shot in the back by this British platoon that was firing willy-nilly into the woods. Wagoner went up to them and said, "For the love of God, you're killing my men, stop." And the response that was given, their officers were all dead, "We've been ordered to fire, and fire we will." So he turned and went back to his men and received a musket ball to the back of the head as he did so. I saw individual acts of bravery on that day. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Gage led our vanguard, the Grenadiers. And he stood exposed to the enemy for the better part of 4 hours, wounded again 2 different times, all the while urging his men to fight, held our front while the rest collapsed. Eventually I was sent by Braddock to go get him and remove him from the field, and we fought step by step for over a mile until we got the army off safely. I was then sent to the second half of the army, which was some 40 miles to our rear, to tell them of what had occurred. The most harrowing experience of my entire life. The cries of the wounded, the lamentations of the dying in the woods, they were enough to pierce a heart of adamant. Something else came to fruition that day which I had not expected. I began to see a discrepancy in how British officers looked at provincial soldiers. When I say provincial, I mean those of colonies. Provincial regiments raised for the defense of a colony as opposed to regular British officers that are paid for by the king. British Army, provincial regiments, militia, 3 different distinctions. Those British officers considered us to be second-class soldiers simply because we were born in Virginia or Pennsylvania or Carolina and not born in England. They preferred a Scottish officer over a Virginian. And the Scots had been involved in a rebellion less than 10 years earlier, the Jacobite Rebellion. A great destruction of Scotland between the two being fought back and forth, and would still prefer a Scottish officer to a Virginian. And we have been loyal all the way through. Do you know where Virginia gets its name, the Old Dominion? You remember the English Civil War back in the 1600s? When the parliamentarians rose up and cut off the head of our king, a true revolution? Virginia would not bow the knee to Parliament. We said, we will not fight against you, but we are loyal to the crown, and we were allowed to be so. And when Charles II regained his throne, he referred to Virginia as his oldest and most loyal dominion. We Virginians consider ourselves as more English than the very English themselves do. And to hear that this British officer, General Braddock, looked down upon me and the other Virginians and Pennsylvanians and Carolinians and Massachusettsmen who are fighting and dying and had been fighting and dying for over a year simply because we did not have birth from England was shocking. We bled the same color. And yet here, not just dishonor, but almost disrespect. And so the frontier defense came. We failed to take Fort Duquesne from the French on 2 different occasions. And so I was returned to the bounds of Virginia to defend the frontier there. 300 miles. I was made Commander-in-Chief of all the forces in Virginia, both militia and provincial. Commander-in-Chief of the Virginia Regiment, Colonel George Washington. For the next 3 years, from 1755 in September until spring of this year, 1758, we tried and frankly mostly failed to keep the people of the backcountry alive. We never had enough food, never had enough weapons, never had enough ammunition, never had enough government support, sometimes through complete unintending ignorance, other times through willful intention. There were rumors that were raised by men of government, men who had never been to the West and seen the conflict, that us of the regiment had been inventing news of the raids that were coming in the backcountry so that we could line our pockets with the money that was so obviously flowing to the frontier defense, which it was not, To this day, in 1758, my men are owed 9 months back pay. 9 months. As if they could actually spend any money, because there's nothing to buy in the frontier, because there's nothing out there to begin with. This defense highlighted to me two very important things. One, that in spite of your government's best efforts in this circumstance, the only ones who could be relied upon were those actually in the frontier. The second, what war does to a population. Destroys it, categorically. Women, children, men, some killed, yes. Some abducted, yes, taken captive. Some, most, fled their homes in fear. We would travel through the backcountry. I knew what we would see every time I came back to Williamsburg to warn our government of what was going on. We would leave and we'd go back to the backcountry. And every time we would go, I would see burned out homes, fields left to rot, tobacco dying on the hill, bodies by side of road, sometimes for 3 and 4 weeks at a time because we had not enough men to bury them. I watched our Indian allies, the Cherokee and Catawba, being brought forward to assist us. I saw them fight to defend our backcountry and homes with more tenacity than those born in Virginia did. At one point in time, in 1757 last year, we had less men in the regiment fighting in Virginia than we had Indian allies fighting for us. We had around 250 or so of our men, and there were nearly 450 Cherokee and Catawba who'd come to our defense. 2 to 1. And for their trouble, our government... So do you think Virginia and Pennsylvania both want a piece of that pie? Yes, we do. And the Ohio Valley is the access to the interior tribes and nations. Through the Ohio is access to the Iroquois. So Pennsylvania and Virginia are caught in squabbles over who controls this. In this very expedition, in this year of 1758, we have had a fight and a debate over which road we are going to use. The one that already exists in Virginia, Braddock's Road that was cut in 55, or the one that doesn't exist in Pennsylvania. Obviously, we know which one we should use. The Virginian one. Because it's already there. I've been caught up in this squabble. I've watched the disunity of these colonies since this began. In 1755, I will highlight this. In 1755, the Braddock's expedition, attacks beginning in the backcountry, families being abducted and attacked all across New York and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Maryland and Virginia. General Braddock called a meeting of the governors impacted by this conflict to meet in Alexandria, Virginia at a midpoint so we all could come together for common cause, to find common grounds, to work together to mount a concerted defense. And only half the governors even bothered to show themselves. Our Virginia governor didn't even arrive to a meeting in his own colony because he was offended that Braddock had invited the Pennsylvania governor first. Oh gosh, indeed. Alphabetical, exactly. Pennsylvania comes before Virginia. It's how it works. Not to Virginians. We are the oldest and richest and wealthiest colony, therefore we are always to come, apparently right after Pennsylvania. But that disunity was evident then. And then the disunity between our own government, I talked about that. The Virginia government completely neglected the people in the backcountry. The Pennsylvania government, no offense meant to Pennsylvania, you all are wonderful people, abandoning you completely. In the first 2 years of your war, no regiment to defend your frontier. None whatsoever. It got so bad that many of the Pennsylvanians were joining the Virginia Regiment because they felt like they could actually do something in the Virginia Regiment. It's better now. Barely. But now we come to this question. We are on an expedition with General Forbes to go to the Ohio Valley with 6,000 soldiers, 3 times that of what we had 3 years ago, to attack Fort Duquesne. And if we take Fort Duquesne from the French, all of these problems in the backcountry will cease. Why? Because they supply every raid from that location. We take Fort Duquesne, the attempts to control the Ohio and the Iroquois Confederacy will collapse and we will regain the allies we have lost. Peace will come to the frontiers of Virginia and Pennsylvania and Maryland specifically. And we are squabbling over which road to use. I became convinced back in June of this year that the reason that Pennsylvania wished to use a road from Raystown straight through, although it is a slightly shorter route, I will readily admit, is because they wished to have access to a road that would go to the Ohio. to better control the fur trade when this is all said and done. My advocacy was that we use Braddock's Road, which was already cut, it's already there, and just needs to be cleared, and it will be easier to utilize. I was then accused of pushing for this because I wished for Virginia to financially benefit from the road that goes that direction and to leave Pennsylvania entirely out of it. Furthest thing from my mind. Right, not the furthest. But you must understand the discrepancy. I was concerned that if we moved with slowness like we had done previously, we've been trying for 3 years to mount an army to go. If we did not move with speed, we would not attack quickly enough, and winter would come. And we would lose all of our momentum. They would supply themselves. They would be able to counterattack, and another year of destruction and horror in the backcountry would happen. This time, I was convinced if we did not take Fort Duquesne by this time next year, by 1759, a year from now, there would not be a single soul left alive in the Shenandoah Valley or the Ohio. Speed was of the essence. I will admit, it has not been my finest few moments. I've written several letters, some of them not well worded, expressing my opinion. One of them was a private letter that was found somehow, God knows how, read to General Forbes, and I was soundly chastised for my impetuosity. And then, of course, to make it even worse, I rejoiced slightly in the fact that as they were cutting the road from Raystown, they got to the Laurel Highlands and couldn't find a way over it. I was surveyor, I could have told them that. And then some blasted lieutenant stumbled into a ravine and went, "Oh look, there's one," and now they've cut the road through the Laurel Highlands and it's going just fine, thank you very much. This close to being proven correct. And Providence had other plans. But now, here we are. November. We began the expedition in June. Winter, nipping at our... in spite of the fact that it's a lovely day today, I know it's just a portent of the horror to come. And I'm afraid that if we're not successful, that another year of destruction will come. However, there is good news. We recently received information that apparently most of the Shawnee have been convinced, and the Delaware, to leave the French by the Quakers of Pennsylvania. Never thought I would say it, but God bless the Quakers. They have been a problem for us in this conflict. Not because of any problem with their religion, no, but just because of the pacifism. And they have also suffered greatly for it. Many in Pennsylvania became so angered by the fact that they thought that the Quaker government in Pennsylvania had not properly defended them that they went and began attacking Quaker communities in the backcountry, destroying them. Again, lack of unity. But we've heard that apparently the Shawnee and Delaware have mostly abandoned the French. Fort Duquesne is effectively empty. Preparing our final push towards Fort Duquesne to take it once and for all and end all of this. In theory. So that's my part in this conflict at this point. That's why a Virginian is now here in Pennsylvania, protecting your blasted road. It's all right. I have a sneaking suspicion with this road, you all will finally win the Ohio Valley. And I will grumble forever. But I own property out the Ohio now because of land grants, so at least I'll own part of it. It'll be a little part of Virginia surrounded by Pennsylvania, in theory. But now I come to my true point of this entire thing. I stand here on the cusp of the goal that I have had from the beginning of this war. To take Fort Duquesne from the French, to bring safety to Virginia, to Pennsylvania, to Maryland. I readily admit to you that when this all began, my hope was, you remember, military service to the king, permanent service to the crown. For what reason? Elevation, finances. I've tried 3 different times to obtain British commission during this war. I tried to bring my entire regiment, who's been through hell and back. Entire regiment into the king's service. No success. I don't have enough influence. I'm not important enough. I don't have enough money to purchase a commission. I don't have enough connections. My men don't have enough connections. A few officers have obtained commission because of their previous family connections from England. Good for them. So I've resigned myself to the fact that military service is not for me. When this war ends, which will probably be at least a few years from now that things are beginning to look up for the English Empire, when the war ends, the Virginia Regiment will be disbanded. We'll go back to being civilians like we've been all along. So the decision I have to make is, do I finish now or later? And the reality is, I have decided to, keep this to yourselves, the General Forbes doesn't know about this yet, but I've decided that I will resign my commission when we take Fort Duquesne. I will resign it, I will go back to Virginia, I will lay aside the sword, and I will take up something else. My health is not good. I've been suffering with dysentery for the last 2 years. Got it in August of 57, nearly collapsed last year, nearly died. Couldn't stand, couldn't walk, couldn't keep anything in. I was eating a diet for 6 months of nothing but hartshorn tea and jelly made out of deer antlers. Yuck is right. Tasteless stuff, just like globs of sludge. It was awful. I'm a bit of a shell of myself, frankly. And it's come back again. It's not good at all. But now I have to stand on this decision to resign my commission, to step aside. You're Pennsylvanians, you won't tell me Virginia. I'll tell you this. I'm also going to get married. Yes, I am sure. Well, I mean, provided I live through the end of this. There's a lady who has been very kind to enter into conversation with me. A lady far above me in every way. And hopefully she hasn't changed her mind. But when I go back, the plan is for us to be married. I will go from being a soldier to a civilian. I've been elected to the House of Burgesses. Never would have expected that. Again, my elder brothers would have, but not so much me. So now I have found myself in a position of transitioning from soldier to civilian, from single to potentially married with 2 small children to care for. That's not terrifying at all. And frankly, I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. The whole world is ahead of me, and I have lived a military life for the past 5 years, and the prospect of changing that is daunting. I will be expected to serve Virginia in a different way, not as a soldier, not so clearly, not sending men to die, not fighting, not standing for king and country, or for those who are serving in the regiment, not for protecting the back country, but instead serving politically. And I have no education for it. I don't have the brilliance and understanding, no philosophy, no law, no understanding of religion, the finer points of technicality, no Greek, no Roman, no Latin, no French. That would have been very helpful. None of that. None of those things. All I have is a lady who is, frankly, willing to teach me. She knows more about politics than I do. She knows more about managing property than I do. I own 1,500 acres. She owns 17,000. Well, her children do. And I have to manage all of this. All while finding a path forward in Virginia. I go from taking care of a regiment of some 700 men to overseeing an estate of over 300 souls who work the property, who live upon it. So much to take up. But I'm expected to. I'm expected to serve. My position says I am a leader in my society. My military experience brings this forward. I look at Virginia, I look at Pennsylvania, and I see the future laying out before us. When this war is over, which it will very soon be, I have no doubt, we will find ourselves with the same problems we have had. Disunity, a lack of willingness to work together in common cause, the British Empire and Englishmen looking down upon all of us as provincial yokels, which frankly some of us are. Not Pennsylvania. Massachusetts. No one here from Massachusetts, are you? Thank God we all can agree. Massachusetts, dear heavens! What on earth? Never mind. We will. Been there once, never again. Hopefully. All of these things must be found. The only path forward after this war is for us to come together to get over these petty squabbles. And we have much to get over. I've already highlighted it. Pennsylvania and Virginia alone have so many differences. Religion, culture, concepts, expectation, economy, our method of agriculture. We rely upon enslaved labor far more than you do. You all have more freedom of religion than we have. We're more tolerant. And then it's Massachusetts. God knows what they do up there. Congregationalists. And then Rhode Island full of Baptists. It's just religious chaos and anarchy. So much to overcome. How to get Massachusetts men and New Yorkers to stop killing each other over who owns Vermont. How to get the men who live in the place called Vermont to stop killing Massachusetts men and New Yorkers and pretending that it's theirs and someone else's. How to get South Carolina to stop pitting the Cherokee against Virginia and Virginia to stop pitting the Cherokee against the South Carolinians. Some path of unification must be found. Some way of us speaking together with decency and common cause, of getting over the petty squabbles of Pennsylvania being listed before Virginia. We could switch that one. That should be the way it is. Virginia should be first. That's fine. We can leave it that way. Some method of finding economic balance with Great Britain. We are, especially in Virginia, we are locked to the economic system of the tobacco trade. Destroys the soil. Every year we find ourselves more and more and more in debt. All of our goods are made in England. Look at yourselves. Ask yourself this. How much of what you are wearing is made within 10 miles of your home? How much of what I'm wearing is made within 10 miles of my home? Nothing. Even the buckskins that I'm wearing, which were hunted in the backcountries of Pennsylvania and Virginia and the Carolinas, are sent to England, processed, tanned, turned into breeches, and then sent back here. Everything is through England. We have no methods of agriculture. We have no methods of development. We have no means of industry here. Everything is mostly agriculture. And unless we find some balance, some parity, we will continue to find ourselves more and more indebted to Great Britain. And this question of how will this war be paid for is already ringing through the halls of government. Virginia alone has paid for our regiment between 10 and 30,000 pounds per annum to defend Virginia. There have been 13 requisitions of funds from Great Britain to Virginia to pay for the war itself, and we've paid every single one of them. In fact, we've paid more. We're actually owed money back. That's a whole other conversation. And this debate will rage. So many things are standing on a knife's edge just now. The only path forward, though, the only path forward, is for all of us to get over our petty squabbles and differences and work together on something. And we can leave Massachusetts out, that's fine. Well, I have babbled endlessly, proving that apparently I have more of a future in politics than I ever once expected. But I'll leave you with this, and then I'll allow you to ask whatever questions you may have. The most important lesson that I've learned in this conflict is back to that point of leadership. I told my officers back in '56 that a leader is marked by how they behave. Not by the fact that they're given a position, not by the fact that they're born to that position. No, they're marked by what they do in that role once they have it. And that is, I think, the most important thing that has come out of this for me. As I transition from soldier to civilian, that I must remember that lesson. That behavior is what matters most. And now I will stop babbling at you. Friends, what questions do you have? What curiosities, what discussion do you wish to engage in? And if you have none, I am happy to sit here and stare at you awkwardly for a few moments. The floor is yours. Good. Awkward staring it is. Well, I will release you all to wander about. I will be here for a short time afterwards, wandering about, and we can have some more conversation. Yes, sir. Jeremy.
Did you have any dealings with Conrad Weiser?
Yes, I do know Conrad Weiser. Not very closely, but he's been involved in several of these expeditions with trade goods and those sorts of businesses. A lot of the ground that I was traipsing over, Conrad Weiser is a merchant and also an Indian agent who operates in the area. And so a lot of the ground I was working out in back in '53, he had previously been on. So Alakepa and George Croghan and others of that region. And I respect the man very highly. Don't know him well, but I know of him, and I've had some dealings with him in the past. Yeah, highly respect him, most certainly. Sir?
Colonel Washington,
Yes.
if I might.
Oh, please.
May I have the honor of addressing your audience here?
I will leave them to your disposal.
Sir, if by your permission, I would like to tell them about my people's contribution to the cause.
I would be more than happy to allow you and yield the floor, sir, an important contribution, one that should not be overlooked.